Zimbabwe is a beautiful country with walls painted in tears and blood. If one jetson drives through the eye-catching, solar-lit and smooth-tarred airport road into the CBD, seeing its beauty, it's unimaginable that its citizens are in deep poverty and excruciating pain. Their rights are abused day and night with impunity. Workers sweat for little.
Our welfare is not being catered for.
Children and women's rights are violated willy-nilly.
I drank Joanna's urine. Yes, I drank my urine.
For a very long time, this pandemic is going to be used as a way to violate human rights.
We have seen women who have been sexually assaulted.
To put it very briefly, it's a cause of concern.
The judiciary is toothless, and this is according to the victims.
Is captured.
The human rights situation in Zimbabwe is dire.
We demand the immediate release of Wopo Timon.
In this film, we dive into the calamity and hone on how the state respected its citizens during the 2020 COVID-19 induced lockdown.
I had introduced a total lockdown and had launched a robust COVID-19 national preparedness and response strategic plan.
Since Mnangagwa's rise to power in 2017, the human rights situation has worsened.
They told us to remove our shirts and lie down, face down. When we did that, one of them started assaulting us on our backs using the horsewhip, the chambok, which we call Mboma in Shona. And we were beaten for about 10 minutes. Then after that, one of them wanted to handcuff us, but the other three denied. So we're taken down the hill and they made us lie on a rock, which they started assaulting us all over again for about 30 minutes. They were taking turns, the three of them were taking turns on us. And when they were done, they just told us to go. And they told us that we had to tell the people back home that soldiers will not be defeated.
Citizens who had hope and faith that Mnangagwa would change the Zimbabwean story are regretting. Their hope and the dream for a free, democratic Zimbabwe is now elusive.
Thousands of Zimbabweans who were pregnant with expectations, who were hopeful that a better Zimbabwe was going to be delivered, are actually licking their wounds at the moment because a lot of what they anticipated is not taken place.
Activists who bear the scars of Robert Mugabe's brutality believe the Second Republic is as bad as the predecessor.
2019, for instance, we recorded the highest number of abductions in recent years, 64 in 2019 alone. From November 2017, the number is 106. You have then around 25 extrajudicial killings, happening within that period. You are also seeing a lot of impunity. So we are not seeing people being prosecuted, people being held to account for previous human rights violations that include abductions and torture. Even in cases where people have been before the civil courts and they have found remedies, there hasn't been any identification of perpetrators who have been tried in the criminal courts.
At his inaugural speech, he promised freedom of speech, association, expression, engagement, and re-engagement, tolerance, amongst others. He spoke of shifts from the politics of intolerance to politics of competitive ideas. 3 years on, the situation is worse. The country has seen a shutdown of dissent.
I'm going to flag the right to the freedom of expression, the freedom to protest, the freedom to petition. That cluster of rights has been one of the most infringed, particularly in this year, including in the COVID-19 situation. When the July 31 situation happened, the plan to protest, we saw the number of arrests that happened. We saw the number of abductions. We recorded at least 14 abductions and disappearances linked to July 31 alone. We then saw what was happening in the institutions of justice. Bail is a right in terms of our constitution, but I think we have all seen what has been coming out of the courts, particularly when it comes to individuals who are perceived to be dissenting.
More have been arrested for opposing the authorities. Some have been abducted and others left homeless.
So we also lost count of time and what date of the week it was. But then they also came back with plastic cups and made us do our urine, which we then exchanged. I drank Joanna's urine, once I drank my urine, and Joanna drank Nsai's urine. And then they told them to defecate so that they could exchange. But at that time, I could not defecate because that's when the cruel guy, who did not even hide his face, looked me in the eye and came and started sucking my breast.
Many are still questioning why Mnangagwa would make promises he could not fulfill. Is he being fought from within or just lack of willingness?
I think the biggest impediment has been the will. To really, because the framework is already there, the will to really make sure that there is enjoyment of human rights. That is what is lacking. We have the will to ensure that there is enjoyment of human rights in our context, because already the framework is there, the constitution has a good Bill of Rights to facilitate enjoyment of rights.
Mnangagwa and some of his close acquaintances are currently on sanction by America, Britain, and the European Union for failing to uphold and respect human rights.
Those measures are there for a reason. They were originally put in place because of human rights violations. And what is decisive for us when we are looking at the future, and there's an annual review of those measures, the decision is taking place on consideration related to the human rights situations in Zimbabwe. So that's decisive. I know that the approach by some of the other countries is a bit different. That they have a more explicit, demands of reforms that needs to be undertaken and so forth. But for the European Union, the key issue is the human rights situation.
Mnangagwa claims that the sanctions are negatively affecting the country's economy, a heavily criticized position by the EU and American embassy.
The illegal imposition of sanctions is seen as witness firsthand the ethical dilemma within our august global economy. To this day, our people and our development journey continue to be frustrated.
These embassies maintain that the sanctions are targeted to only a few individuals, and this should not affect the country.
The EU measures themselves, like I said, are very restricted, very targeted. So I can't see how there could be a consequence for the wider Zimbabwean economy from there. And on the other hand, then you have the years and years of mismanagement of the economy and corruption clearly have left its mark on the Zimbabwean economy, and that's the reason why we are here.
They also maintain that Mnangagwa's regime must implement reforms before advocating for the removal of sanctions. Amongst other contested reforms are media freedoms and access to information.
We have seen arbitrary arrests of human rights defenders, journalists, and CSO leaders on flimsy excuses of people probably tweeting and talking about situations affecting citizens.
Journalists are still being harassed, assaulted, and arrested for doing their work. They are regarded as enemies of the state.
We have had state security agents and agencies ignoring the fact that we are essential service providers. We have had our press cards ignored. We have had our members harassed, beaten up, arrested over the period. We have had quite a number of engagements with the police, with the ministry through its permanent secretary, Nick Mangwana, and the information minister, Monica Mchangwa, but nothing has changed.
Leopold Munende, Frank Chukore, Samuel Takawira, Hopewell Chingono, Rumbidzai Chizarura, amongst others, bear testimony to police brutality during the lockdown. During the initial lockdown, freelance journalist Panashe Makufa, together with Misa Zimbabwe, took a Zimbabwe Media Commission and Police Commissioner Matanga to court after the government failed to classify journalists as essential service. They were not allowed to work during the lockdown, a decision Justice Manzunzu regarded as ill-advised.
Quite frustrating, for instance, in the one case, to have to go to court for an order declaring that journalists are entitled to go about and carry out their duties as media practitioners.
But this did not stop the attack on media freedoms by the state and some politicians who felt threatened by the informative work journalists do.
We object to the arrest of Hopewell Chingono. We object to the weaponization and instrumentalization of the profession of journalism. Journalism are a medium of transmission of a message. So you deal with the message, you don't deal with the conveyor, you don't deal with the vector, you don't deal with the agent who is making that communication.
Human rights defenders were also not spared.
Why are you doing this to Zimbabwe? Why are you doing this to Zimbabwe? Why are you doing this? Okay, but why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? I will get it.
Some had to go into hiding after they were allegedly sued by the police for standing up for people's rights.
Where is Obey right now? Where is Makomborero Aruzivishe right now? They are all in hiding, being hounded by a predatory, technocratic state led and presided over by one Emerson Mnangagwa.
Freedom of expression and association are fundamental human rights, and this is according to Section 57 of the Constitution and United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In Zimbabwe, workers barely have rights.
Ukangoita silly mistake paukongonzi absolute iwoya the whole day uri pabasa saka tizoti zvepamutemo here kana ari sematoilets epanapo tinoshandisa matoilets evarume hatina matoilets atinonzi ngevakadzi kungoita zvatinge taita chiro zvisina nebasa.
Splash Paints, an Indian-owned company, is one of the perpetrators of workers' rights violations.
6 a.m. to 6 p.m. for 12 hours. So we get it by night. 6 p.m. 6 a.m. To do my masks, my respirators, in second exclusion. Respirator, Tina, you to take out to safety change apatting at the even my groove was into one to Panama Kim Dot.
Workers say they cannot report violations because the company's executive is closely linked to President Mnangagwa and publicly claim that they're untouchable.
Company management and shareholders, they are refusing to allow workers to exercise their right to freedom of association. That is guaranteed in the constitution of the country. That is also protected in the Labour Act, to join a union of their choice. The reasoning by the company is quite awkward and unlawful, because shareholders are saying they belong to ZANU-PF and they don't want workers to join a union that belongs to the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions, because in their warped thinking, they believe that Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions is an extension of the movement for democratic change.
The splash management is indeed untouchable. After reporting them for violations of the lockdown regulations, we ended up being arrested and charged with disorderly conduct. The approach used by splash management is the same as the government's approach to labor issues. When Finance Minister Ntuli Ncube announced that the Zimbabwean dollar, by then bone note, was equivalent to the United States dollar, money started to lose value and salaries started being unmeaningful.
The government has promised that they will be able to restore the value of our salaries, the 2018 salaries, which were illegally slashed by Ntuli through currency reforms. They have promised that they are going to restore our salaries by June 2021. That remains a promise. But for us, really, we know our lives cannot be deferred. We have families to feed today. We have fees to pay today. We have different costs to meet today, and we cannot allow this government to defer our lives.
Many expected the government to consider their workers, but instead, it started victimizing those who stood up to ask for better salaries. Affording basic health care, food, or even sending children to school was nearly impossible. We saw teachers struggling to make ends meet. One rural teacher was caught stealing mealies. This shows the extent to which the situation had gone.
You will see the manifestation of the difficulties in the resignation of almost 12,000 teachers from 28 September to date. We have just resigned within the profession, citing one difficulty and another. But more importantly, the Zimbabwean state moved in to use the COVID-19 crisis to really curtail fundamental basic rights and freedoms of our community, the teaching community. You realize that our constitution provides for the freedom of association and assembly, but this freedom has been completely withdrawn from us by the government. You will note that on the 22nd of June, when the teachers organizing under Amalgamated Teachers Union of Zimbabwe attempted to hand over a petition in Masvingo protesting against underpayment, they were obviously adhering to all the safety measures, be it safe social distancing, be it wearing personal protective equipment, but they were arrested.
The right to education was also denied.
We don't have access to online platforms to give instruction to our learners. These learners were at home. They lost their right to education in that particular period. So out of 4.6 million enrolled in Zimbabwean schools, only 5% accessed the right to education during that particular period because they had access to online resources. The majority of them had failed to access those online resources.
Students could not be spared. One Muchehiwa was abducted. Many were arrested and imprisoned for standing up for their rights.
We had around and above 40 arrests of student leaders, abductions came by, assaults came by. We cannot even talk about threats. So it speaks to a situation in which academic freedom has not been accommodated enough by environment. It speaks to a sense in which social justice has not been given a chance to thrive in society. It's such a worrying trend that you find crackdowns of student activists. For now, Alan Moy is in prison for about 42 days pre-trial incarceration. So it all speaks to a sense in which human rights are being violated daily, and COVID-19 is being used as a scapegoat. It's being used as something in which the government could move certain narratives and certain agendas which are political in nature.
Those with power are continuously using it to silence those with dissenting voices.
We recorded in excess of 1,800 violations, some of them also involving the discrimination of citizens who are perceived to belong to opposition political parties or who have dissenting voices, who as a result of all that were subjected to discrimination when food and other aid was actually distributed.
We have seen that a lot of these extremely draconian restrictive laws are still in place, even though they're not being enforced, because the pandemic is not raging in Zimbabwe. They are selectively enforced when they want to fix someone for political reasons. Then, of course, we have seen the suspension of by-elections, which totally violates all citizens' political rights to choose their leaders, the representation in parliament, and they have stated that it's indefinitely suspended until COVID-19 is no longer considered a formidable pandemic. That could be a very long time. So I think that this pandemic is going to continue to be used for a really long time. For political reasons, which have absolutely nothing to do with the virus itself or protecting people from the virus.
Tawanda from Epworth was badly assaulted by soldiers and the police. They even broke his hand for purely doing nothing.
Nguya chingoita zvinhu zvavaita hapana chandakamboona chanchirekuita, asi chandakashamisika nazvo pakasvika mapurisa nemasoja vakasangana vaita vatanga kunzwa kuti ndaitaura nevana vakanga vamhanya vachitiza vanhu vanongo vakavhunduka, chobva ndataura kuti no ndikutaura nevana vanga ichiti kuti mukutiza izvi kanzi kutotaura nesu kutopindura bwauya kuwambirwa saka vakandirova vakanditakura vabva vaenda neni vakanonditsira kwaSolani. Vandisiya kwaSolani ndasingachagona kufamba, saka ndakatotanga kukomuniketa navanhu nefoni ndandinayo ngeri munhu. Ndopava ndakazoya ndikatorwa ndikatakurwa kuya Kumbu, but after ipapo ndakanga ndatone fracture ruoko rwachikoro nekurova.
The family was left in tears and short of words.
Takatosara tichichema takadongorana nepangundu because angari mupurisa wanemasoja afu vakasvika kurotkosoko vachimurova vaenda naye.
The biggest question one has to ask after seeing all of this is, who is at the center of these human rights violations and why? Zimbabweans are continuously troubled, asking themselves questions without answers. And some of these questions are, where is the judiciary in all of this? And what is the role of the law enforcement? Amongst other questions. Well, it seems the judiciary is captured and citizens cannot expect anything more from them because they cannot bite the hand that feeds them.
The judiciary is captured because all our cases, which were clear cases that we have not done anything wrong, at the magistrate court you don't get bail. You only get entertained hope of getting bail when you go to the High Court. And they use lawfare. They use the law to fight dissenting voices. They know you've done nothing wrong, but they use the judiciary, the prosecution, and the judicial officers to ensure that you are on remand or you are on bail for 2 years. In that meantime, you can't organize, you can't mobilize workers. Then you are acquitted after 2 years, and this has been demobilizing. So we have a judiciary that is captured that should not be in question.
But who is to blame here? A human rights activist thinks the National Prosecuting Authority, NPA, is the one to blame for all of this.
We need to seriously look at the corruption at the NPA And I've actually written a letter to Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission to say the National Prosecuting Authority should actually be investigated so that we cap corruption in the courts, because that is where it is happening every day of our life.
We gave the ZANU-PF government the right to respond. In their defense, this is what they had to say.
You're wrong. There are no human rights abuses. But what COVID regulations do, they suspend certain parts of our freedoms. Natural. But there is no deliberate restriction of people's rights outside the ambit of or the context of the COVID-19 regulations. And these things that Zimbabwe is doing is happening throughout the world. Whenever you are talking of a lockdown rule, all those people are suspending rights in some way. People are fining you for getting out, for going out. So like the United Kingdom, I think they will fine you £1,000. That's the same thing. And they are giving quite some long sentences for you if you refuse to disclose that you've been to certain countries. You will actually go to prison for 10 years. That's again a restriction of people's rights. So there's nothing peculiar that's happening to Zimbabwe, it's not happening elsewhere.
But what should be done?
Zimbabwe has a history of unresolved issues in terms of human rights. And I think, in order to really put this record straight and have a new direction for the country, you need to have that clarity and transparency that come up with following up, due follow up to these cases, and that the culprits are also brought into the.
We need to be able to rally around what unites us as a nation and speak about the issues that are affecting us, so that we go back to the nation that we had a vision for, especially when we sat down to work on the Constitution. There is still a possibility for us to be able to get into dialogue not amongst political leaders. We have seen political pacts being signed in the past, and they have failed to subsist because they are elite pacts. We would want a broad-based approach to dealing with the problems that are before Zimbabwe at the moment. 2023 is around the corner, and new promises will be made again. They say, load the gun and the environment will pull the trigger. The biggest question will be, what will Zimbabweans do?